Hey, what's going on, everybody? Joe Menza here, and I'm outside doing some painting. And I thought I'm going to do 3 paintings in one video for you. And I'm using some colors. Those will be on the bottom of the screen here shortly. What I'm doing is I'm applying a wash, but I'm using some phthalo blue. I thought I'd do some different colors and I'd stick within the blue-green sort of range and focus a little bit more on contrast. So I'm using 140-pound arches, and we're going to be using sort of the viridian green. That's a color you get in a lot of these little kits, and you get that. It's very artificial looking. What do you do with it? And here's a way that you can use that. So we're going to be sticking within the viridian green, phthalo blue, yellow ochre, and a Payne's gray to kind of darken that out. So now I'm just kind of going over the top. Little yellow ochre, raw sienna you can use. Either way, whatever kind of gets you into the yellowy greens. But we want them to be darker greens and still have a sort of a realistic tone to them, rather than the garish kind of a green that a lot of times those colors seem to have. So now I'm coming back now with this phthalo blue, a little bit darker, a little bit over the top. So we're kind of layering things a little bit, utilizing that yellow to kind of create some areas of light into the sky. Now this one here has a little bit of a hill, so we're just going to so we don't have a perfectly straight. A lot of times you make that perfectly straight horizon line, and sometimes you have to, but in this case we want to just create a little bit more dimension, a little more depth. So I'm coming back and I'm adding 2 more layers of the phthalo blue, and I've added some Payne's gray to that, so I'm using that for my darkening. Now, one of the other colors I listed on the bottom was alizarin, and the reason I have alizarin on there is I'm not really using that as a color, but a lot of times if your green is like too green, you can gray it out by adding a little red. So the alizarin is used to tamp that down a little bit. Now, as you can see, I've left a little white hole there. I've kind of figured that's a nice little spot to leave. Sometimes that happens and you're painting and for whatever reason there's a little hole there. Sometimes it can work to your benefit. So now I've added just a little. I haven't really cleaned the brush, but I'm adding a little bit of the ochre, and I want to make that hill a little toward the greener side. But it's sort of a gray green. And again, you can experiment. Keep that red in mind for, it's a, what do they call that? Can't think of the word, but if you go on the color wheel, it's the opposite on the color wheel. So it's a companion color. I can't think of the word. You guys probably know it. It'll pop in my mind. But anyways, here's the little hill that I'm talking about. And so we'll make a nice little tree line on that hill. Again, we're working within this range of colors, blue, green. We're staying within that aspect of it. I'm just kind of using the hake to create some shapes. We're going more for shapes. So you can use that, vertically use the hake, and you can, turn it sideways. Make sure the trees are standing perfectly straight. Even though you're on a hill, you don't want your trees to be sideways. And then some small ones down there in the light. We don't want to cover up that light. And just kind of building up on that a little bit. I wanted to get a video out. If you're watching this, as soon as it's been put up. I usually try to get videos out on Friday because I like, I know people be painting over the weekend, so I try to give you something for the weekend. But I had too many things going on, some good, some bad. And so I finally got to paint on Sunday, so I figured, you know what, you waited, so I'm going to give you 3 paintings in one. But we're all going to follow the same kind of theme here. So now I'm coming in just because of the size. This is really the truth of it in this case is I'm using my small fan brush, and I really like this brush. It's got a nice long handle, but it's got a very small fan on it. So I really like it for doing little foliage. Now, I've added more Payne's Gray to the mix. More Payne's Gray, more phthalo blue. You'll notice as you add that together, you'll get a very deep, it's a deep blue, but when you put it over the top of the colors you already have there, it really looks like a very dark green. So now immediately you'll see those trees look a little bit closer. So just again, go with shapes. That's our main focus here. And now we've pushed back everything in the back. We've got a nice sky with a nice little light going through. So just kind of building up the, oh, finally I got the complementary colors. So if you look at the color wheel, you'll see where red is on the opposite side of blue. So it's a good way to tamp down certain, if they're like too green. Red green is the most contrasting colors on the color wheel. So again, we're just building up trees here. You make whatever combination that you like. And then by pushing them up past the trees in the background, you don't want to cover up all those trees back there. They contrast nicely against the sky. So by having those nice and dark, you get that nice contrast, that nice counter change that really makes paintings pop and really makes them desirable to the eye. So I've got the water already now in place because we did that from when we did the sky, right? If I'm speaking correctly here. And then we'll put the shadows down in there. So we got a nice light bouncing off the water. And again, the contrast works to our advantage down there as well. So by pulling down with the brush those dark tree colors into the water, it has a nice reflective quality to it. This could be an evening time. It could be just as the sun is coming up, either way. Maybe more toward somewhat of an evening scene. But it's very effective, and it's fairly simple to do. But it's gonna require you obviously to play around with those color combinations. And the nice thing is a lot of people, one of their big issues is with the hake brush is, how much water do I need on my brush? Well, that's something you're going to learn in time. But if you're using like a brush like I'm using, like the fan brush, well, it doesn't hardly hold any water. So when you mix it in your little tray, you're going to have an inky consistency. So in between the trees, I'm just putting looks a little too, there's nothing there, so I'm just kind of putting a little foliage in, kind of in between the trees, and make those background trees pop a little bit more. Then the last thing I'm going to do here is I'm taking a clean wet brush and I'm running through the trees to lift some paint off, to look like a little bit of a ripple in the water. And that's really the last thing that we're going to do here. And we've pretty much got a finished painting. So this one here is fun. You don't have to get stressed out on, getting things exact. So you can also use yellow to work on the greens in the tree if you want them a little more green. You can add like a cad yellow a little bit. But that's pretty much it. A simple yet dramatic painting. And we did that one in about 10 minutes or so. And here it is in its virtual frame. Turned out very nicely. So we'll go on to now the next painting here. Same colors, same similar idea. You'll notice my water in my jar is getting pretty dirty, so I'm just going to give it a spray so we get some clean water on there. But the phthalo blue is very, very staining. So as you can see, I'm almost just putting on the paint right off the bat instead of wetting the paper down. So I didn't pre-wet the paper here except for the spray. And so with that happening, I'm going to leave some holes in the sky down the middle rather than paint the whole thing or give any sort of a tint to it. So we're going to do the same thing we did last time, but we're going to leave holes, and we're going to progressively go darker on that phthalo, so the phthalo blue and Payne's gray combination. And we're just going to layer that in, touching in a little cloud patterns here and there. You can do however you like, whatever seems natural. And again, adding a little bit more Payne's gray, letting those kind of melt into the cloud pattern that's there. And on the bottom here, we're sweeping in, and again, leaving areas of white where they would naturally maybe reflect off of the sky. So we're using the Payne's gray combination and phthalo blue. Now I've mixed in just a hair bit of Viridian. See, you got to be careful with these. Are very strong colors, but they do make good mixers if you're trying to get to a quick dark point. And you'll see you use phthalo blue, Payne's gray. You can use a little bit of alizarin, and you'll get some very, very dark colors. You never really want to use Payne's gray totally by itself because the color just looks very dead and it'll reflect light. So again, we're doing the same thing here with the trees, using a vertical with the hake brush. This one here is a little different now. We've got sort of a convergence. So it's just to change up the composition a little bit. We're making a sort of a V-shaped, a little bit of a valley shape here. And just to change the slope of the countryside. So before we had a slope coming down from the right to the left, and now we've got two slopes coming down almost sort of in a valley configuration. So just to give you some different ideas on how to change things up. I've said it before, the background, the first washes set the stage. Here I am, I want to show you a little bit of mixing here. I don't always show this, it's so hard for me to show, but this gives you just a quick idea. And we're doing the same thing. We've mixed the Payne's gray and the phthalo blue, and we're now darkening it. Of course, we've got a little yellow in there. You'll notice in that background you can see a little bit of I mixed a little bit of cad yellow hue. Those are the Cotman colors to get that greener tone. So we're sticking within the dark green range. So the sky has phthalo blue and Payne's gray, and then the foliage background has phthalo blue, cad yellow, and a little bit of Payne's gray. And now basically we're increasing the amount of Payne's gray and creating some foreground sort of pine trees here. And if you're using a small fan brush like I am, you'll notice you have to dip into water to get what you need water-wise. You're going to be getting very little water on that brush. So it's almost like using ink. You're going to have to keep dipping into your reservoir or your mixing compartment. If you're using a tray, then you'll have to keep dipping back into your tray. But now you'll see we're making sort of a front line of shrubbery. And on the right side, I've almost covered up too much of the background. But that's okay. If it happens, it happens. We'll roll with it. I could probably add more in the background. But you'll see I've got those trees very small in the center. Just giving it a little spray. It's hot out today, so I don't want things to dry up too quickly. I'm going to add some bigger pines on this side. This time being a little bit more careful not to cover up too much of that background, because it's those two layers that gives you depth. And now you'll see by leaving that white, unlike before, now we've left this white, we've got a really dramatic contrast between the darker trees and that bit of white that's showing through. It's a shock to the eyes more than anything. Zooming in a little bit here to kind of show you, I'm not painting up too close to the trees so that it looks like we've got still have a hill coming down. So in the construction of this one, it's just a slightly bit more complicated than the previous one, since this one has some changes in the geometry of the hill. So by leaving that little bit of white there, it kind of gives you, I'm just going to pull down a little bit here and there so it's not too much, but pulling it down in a sloping direction so that it slopes downward. And it looks like there's changes to the topography. I'm really challenging myself with my vocab today. So I don't want to cover up that nice hole there, but I do want a little bit of contrast. So when you set up your background, you set up, your contrast. All of a sudden it's getting windy now. I don't know what's going on here, but all of a sudden the wind is picked up. So we've got the nice blue phthalo combination in the water, left some holes there where the sky is coming down. So everything kind of matches. It's sort of a, continuity. So I've given myself there the little spray to keep it wet. And now we're going to add a little bit of Viridian to the mix. What's already on the brush, give that a sweep and give a nice deep blue water effect. Really contrast from what we have in the trees. Still the same basic concept of colors, but now we're going with the Viridian. If you don't like, you can add more, you can add less, you can leave it. Really what I want to do is stick to two washes, so we have the initial wash of the water and then we go over the top and we get a two-tone. So when it comes to layering, I almost like 3 layers. When it comes to washes, I like to keep it down to 2 if I can. And sometimes I'll come back with third with a little bit darker of a wash as a final. So I've got my hake and I'm just randomly trying to put in a few more as I look back upon this. Just any small details I can do. Maybe sweep down a little reflection into the water. Very mild because the water is already dark. And really that's it. We've got another one down in another 10-minute span. Similar, very similar colors, similar idea. And now we'll take a look at it in its virtual frame. And it's 2 down. And now we'll go to our third and last one. And I've gone back and washed the brush and I've got that yellow ochre on again. It's almost starting to turn green because of the blue in my jar. I'm just too lazy to go and dump it and wash it out, so this will be the last one. But I've definitely got a lot of contamination on the brush. And we're back to that phthalo blue again. Now remember, phthalo blue, again, it's very staining. So number one, if you're not a neat painter, don't wear your best clothes, because if you splash anything, you're not going to get it out. Secondly, if you get phthalo blue on white areas that you want to keep open, you're going to have a hard time lifting it out. you'll need sandpaper. So we're doing just a different cloud pattern, but leaving more in the center open than before. So dabbing in and doing some strokes down on an angle from the top to almost make it look like light is coming down. So these I'm just kind of making up as I go. We're going to just use the same colors in the water, or in the foreground. Actually, the water is going to be the white area. Adding a little more Payne's gray, kind of sweeping in from the top, really pulling in the eyes into that lit area. And now we'll start with the foliage. And this will have a little bit more water. So instead of, for the topography, we're going to have land masses. Okay, we want to keep the middle open. And the land masses can shape the direction of our water that's coming through. So by doing this, we're going to create our little land masses. I've added a little more Payne's gray. And I'm just kind of dabbing in a little bit so that we keep a little bit of variation in the land itself. And now I'll go back to my trusty small fan brush. Just dabbing in some trees now. Again, just like before, go with shapes. One thing about this little fan brush, it helps me to make smaller trees. If I use the Hake brush, I'll end up with giant trees. And my scale, you'll notice, is almost always the same. But the smaller you can make the trees and things, make your painting seem that much larger, like widescreen, you know, like a more panoramic view. So we're just creating some foliage. Don't want both sides looking exactly the same. Kind of roughing in some, just roughing in some foliage. Just kind of getting that started. Of course, now on this left side, there's a little bit more cad yellow hue mixed in there. And raw sienna or yellow ochre are good to mix in with if you're using phthalo or viridian. It'll give you a better green to work with for foliage. A more believable green without looking gaudy, you know. So this will give you a chance to use a little bit up of that viridian green. You won't use much. Now you notice I'm bringing that peninsula out just a little bit more, and it causes that water to turn. So we're shaping the water just a bit. It creates that little turn in the river. And then we'll put another peninsula in down here. And that will create yet another turn to the water. Again, roughing in some foliage and some trees, sticking with shapes. And I think this is just fun and relaxing to do. I mean, don't get too hung up if your colors are a little off, or you're, you know, look at them in your tray as you're mixing them. Have a scrap piece of paper next to you that you can dab on and say, okay, is that the color, you know. Putting in a little shadow, or I'm sorry, reflection into the water. You know, for the most part, focus on the shapes and your composition at the very least. These are like ink blot tests in a sense. I mean, you're just putting in the shape and you're letting the person's eye and brain do the legwork that's looking at it. Giving it a little spray. I don't want it to run too much, but I want to break up any. Sometimes the darks get a little too dark. So what we want to do is we just want to break it up just a hair bit, just to move the water, maybe the paint just a little bit. We don't want it to run. If you give it a few extra sprays, if you want it to run, then give it a few extra sprays, and you'll get runs. I'm just kind of going around and seeing where I can put in some darks and enhance what I have. So again, just to recap our main colors: phthalo blue, Payne's gray, and yellow, a yellow of some kind. And then our secondary players would be the alizarin crimson and viridian, used in a very minimal way. So in a sense, yes, minimal palette. Keeping it minimal, keeping our composition and details down to the bare minimum, so we're not getting hung up in the details and we're just really having fun. The hardest thing probably that you'll encounter if you're a beginner is just getting sort of the tone, not the tones, but you see how we have the background, we have that blue, and then we have the green on top. I think getting that down and mixing the colors right will probably be your challenge for this one. So we've got dark areas just bouncing all over the page of varying tones. It's a good practice for playing with light and contrast and seeing the drama and what that can do for you. Another fun thing you can do is, let's say that light in the back isn't light and you shaped a sky around, say, like a mountain. You could actually make a mountain without making a mountain, and you can just put in the slope of the mountain shades over the white. Another thing you can do. Just a thought. Maybe I'll do that in another video. I don't do it because I like scraping. But we didn't do any real scraping in these videos. Maybe I'll do a little, up till this one now, we did a little card scraping around the trees, as you can see, but minimal card scraping. I did it to create more contrast here. I got to talking, I didn't stop to go over it, but I did a little card scraping. If I look at something and I think, well, this just looks like a solid block, I'll do a little scraping. But in the other two, we didn't really do any of that. And no white use here, so you may not have, if you've been following along and you've been using the 6 or 7 basic colors we've been using, you may not have phthalo blue. You might have, chances are, if you've ever bought a set, though, you've got phthalo blue and viridian in there. They're in almost every set that I've ever seen. And the viridian, I never know what to do with that color, but this is a way that you can really use that. You could probably use a form of turquoise too in there, depending on the manufacturer. So I'm just kind of looking this over and seeing where I can enhance a few things. Not much more to do here. You can see where the water turns in and it makes that nice S curve. Actually looks exactly like an S, but it's the thing that leads you into the picture. And we've got quite a bit of light from the sky. You can have as much as you want. If you wanted to close that off a little more, you could. So I'm just looking around again. I'm seeing where can I add some more darks, pop out a few more things. Just kind of working on that reflection a little bit. reflections are always challenging because, and most of the time when you see them in water, from trees, they're actually darker than the thing you're painting itself. So I'm bringing out that little peninsula. I've got a perfect S-curve. Those peninsulas up top could be a little straighter, but with the dark and the light, nobody's really gonna put up much of a fuss. So we're just touching a few things up, and that's it. That's the end of this third painting. I hope you enjoyed these. Here it is in its virtual frame. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Have a wonderful week.